Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalist of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
I invite you to settle more deeply into your seats and ground yourself in our Mother, the Earth. In our stillness, we connect with our breath, thereby connecting us with all our ancestors upon whom we depend for our very existence. Source of life, we give thanks for the ability to draw one more breath, to be able to wake up today and face both the joys and sorrows that drive each moment of our becoming. We know that today there are those among us who are dealing with the loss of a job or the inability to find a meaningful livelihood or more limited access to food due to cuts in government funding. There are those among us who are going through a difficult uncoupling process. There are those among us who are dealing with the loss of a loved one, realizing that grief is not a linear or one and done kind of process. Lover of our soul, touch our aching hearts and bring us solace and comfort. Today, we also reflect on areas of our lives where we may have fallen short of our highest and best selves. Forgive us for the words and actions that may have caused pain or suffering, intentionally or unintentionally. May we as a congregation and as a nation also recognize our complicity to systems of oppression and engage in the long and arduous task of reparation. Grant us the fortitude and perseverance to make things right again. In the depths of our silence, we encounter your healing presence, knowing that grace appears to us in strange and unexpected ways. And so we take this opportunity to sit in mindfulness together.
I lived much of my mid-30s in a state of yearning. I was single, and I had been for a while, and I wanted a partner and possibly a baby. Unfortunately, wishing didn't make it so. I had a longing, and I had to put myself out there. I had to go on bad first dates. I had to make small talk. I had to get up off my couch. Because as much as I wanted to find a partner, they were not simply going to appear next to me in my living room. I wasn't sure where I was going to find them. I was scared I never would. But I knew one thing for sure as I looked around my living room: they weren't on my couch. I've been thinking a lot about yearning these days. I know I'm not alone hungering for a better, more just, more loving world. And it is hard to know how we will get there. And though Tuesday's election results brought a wave of hope for many, there is still a firestorm swirling around our nation. Many of us feel overwhelmed or afraid. People are worried about trans family members, worried about immigrant friends, worried about those among us who rely on SNAP benefits, worried about our children. And the fascist policies of this country are making all of us less safe, less free. These are not abstract concerns. For many of us, they are real and close to home. And fears like these can make me feel small, can make me feel helpless. And there's sort of a claustrophobia that comes about, a spiritual closing in of the walls, and possibilities feel less clear. And that spiritual claustrophobia can induce a panic, immobilizing us, isolating us from one another. And the hard truth is, there are many outcomes we simply cannot predict or control. So when this happens, what do we turn to? What values might guide us through times of uncertainty, of fear, and times of violence? The Talmud is the central text of rabbinical Judaism, second in authority only to the Hebrew Bible. The Talmud is a primary source of Jewish religious law and Jewish theology, and it was compiled in the 6th century. And one of the most quoted passages goes something like this: "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." Wisdom from the 6th century. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Words paraphrased from the ancient prophet Micah, recorded for eternity. 3 years ago, this congregation learned of our own history with slavery. This congregation was founded in the early half of the 18th century. In addition to the local taxes that everyone was required to pay to the parish, this congregation's original meeting house was funded by the purchase of pews. And 3 years ago, we learned that many of those pew purchasers were enslavers. And we know that the African people that they enslaved had names, stories, families. Rose, Punch, Dinah, and others. Funding this congregation, making this place possible, came at the direct expense of them. So in October of 2022, a group formed within our congregation, Reckoning and Repair, and they have moved us through a process of exploration, of truth-telling, culminating in a congregational vote in May 2024. At that time, we voted on an affirmation, an acknowledgement of our hard history, and a commitment to repair. As Unitarian Universalists, we have 7 values that guide our faith: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity, and love. see those values and how they center on love. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Vanna White. Naming our values is not enough. We have to live them, act on them, embody them. Move beyond that spiritual claustrophobia that threatens to trap us, threatens to affix us to our couches. Now, how many of you have heard of James Luther Adams? Some of you get extra credit. James Luther Adams, or fondly called JLA, is one of our denomination's most prolific and influential 20th century theologians. In the 1920s and 30s, he was a parish minister, and then in the 50s turns towards academics and advocacy. And in the early days of his career, he traveled to Germany and learned from religious leaders who had survived Nazi terror. Some of them by complying, some of them by resisting. And all of these stories greatly influenced him. Listen to his words written in Boston in 1970s. He asks, if fascism should arise in the States, what in your past performance would constitute a pattern or framework of resistance? He says he could only give a feeble answer to this question. My principal political activities had been reading the newspaper and voting. I preached sermons on the Depression or in defense of strikers. Occasionally, I uttered protests against censorship in Boston. But I had no adequate conception of citizen participation. No adequate conception of citizen participation. In other words, James Luther Adams needed something more. The answer to resisting fascism wasn't on his couch. And this sense compelled JLA to prioritize civic engagement and social fabric. And he turned to our Unitarian theological conversation of covenant, saying that we must be accountable to our communities, our institutions, and our histories. He said that covenant only works in that context. And First Parish has a particular history, one entangled with oppression. And to belong here is to contend with that truth and follow our values on a path forward. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And how much work is enough? That is a haunting question that centuries later we hear from the prophet Micah, threaded through rabbinical study, echoed by JLA. Do our past performances create the future we yearn for? In 1975, James Luther Adams spoke of the tenets of liberal religion. He said that there's a common theme in liberal religion where we reject creedal coercion, we champion open-mindedness, we favor critical thinking. And he says that these are beautiful attitudes, but attitudes alone do not make or change history. The road to hell, he says, is paved with good attitudes. JLA tells us that changing history requires institutional embodiment. Institutional embodiment, making our attitudes, our values, fleshy and real. And when doing the work of repair and reparations, the outcomes might not be clear. Can we ever do enough? Will we be forever daunted by the enormity of that history? So when outcome-based decision-making isn't quite the right framework, can we use our values to guide us? Can our institution, our congregation, embody our values in everything we do? Perhaps being bold is more important than being right. Perhaps trying and stumbling is more important than perfection. If the burden of perfection was lifted, what is a bold way you might live your values? And if we live into that commitment, perhaps there will be ripple effects we cannot even imagine, like the dye turning the water blue. Last week, 18 of us signed on to Zoom for our weekly Wednesday evening chapel. Chapel is akin to a Vespers service, a 20-minute gathering of poetry, music, and perhaps most importantly, time for silence and sharing. And during the time of sharing, Jen Davis Kay unmuted herself to share a joy. Jen and Annie Hamza from the Indigenous Justice Working Group created a pilot program for our religious education program. 3 sessions to explore issues of Indigenous spirituality, identity, and justice. Today, at this very moment, the children are engaged in the 2nd session of this pilot. And Jen was sharing with Chapel this success and also sharing a gratitude. When she started working on this curriculum, she was influenced by 2 other First Parish members, both who were at Chapel last Wednesday. Sibylla Boslet and Lori Kenshaft. And unbeknownst to them, they played a part in Jen and Annie's work, like the dye rippling out in the water. 2 summers ago, Sibylla led a summer service here about her own German heritage and Germany's approach to reparations after the Holocaust. And this truth-telling provided a spiritual roadmap. And then Jen reached out to Lori to learn more about native plants and seeds. And Lori responded with practical and needed information. And Lori, after hearing Jen's sharing, later reflected that she was quite surprised in her role in the story. It seemed to me, Lori says, that I was responding in the way one does when someone asks about something one is capable of doing, especially something that happens to be easier for me than most people. The default answer is yes, if one has the capacity in other ways, time, health, etc. But looking back now, I realize this feeling is suggestive of how we are in community with each other. This sort of easy giving and receiving is a blessing indeed, and one that all too many people don't experience. To say yes when asked. Both Sibylla's and Lori's gifts are woven into the work that Jen did. And now other congregations are interested in this pilot program for Indigenous justice. I hear in this story the power of our community, of being in a place where what we can offer makes a difference. Perhaps what you offer is like the yellow dye, less obvious, but still so beautiful. We never know what ripples occur. Mayor-elect Zoran Mandani once knocked on doors for a city council candidate in Queens. The candidate lost badly. And here's what that man said in an interview this week. He says, "I have no problem saying Zoran is a tremendously better candidate than I ever was. He speaks to people in ways I never could. But his success has given new meaning to all of our hard work years ago. So many years ago, knocking on doors, meeting with community elders." He says, "My campaign might not have been the swing of the axe that knocked down the tree. The first swing rarely is. But it turns out we were breaking ground for something bigger." We never know what ripples will occur or what swing of the axe will knock down the tree. Our UU value of transformation invites us into the work of embodied repair, not out of a place of guilt or shame, but from a place of imagination and possibility. There's a Presbyterian theologian that writes about the importance of finding one's place and work in the world. He calls it vocation. We might call it mission. When figuring that out, Frederick writes, "Neither the hair shirt or the soft berth will do. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." At First Parish, where does our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet? What are we uniquely positioned to offer this aching world? Let me give you the unexpected answer first. Clean bathrooms. 2 months ago on Labor Day, we hosted hundreds of marchers participating in the Interfaith Prayers for Liberty event. People of faith walked from the Lexington Battle Green to the Embrace statue in downtown Boston. About 250 people marched, and an additional 100 people showed up on our lawn for a brief interfaith prayer program. Reverend Jonipher spoke powerfully about centering love and creating sanctuary. And First Parish provided snacks and refreshments to the marchers. It might seem small, but to me, this is indicative of exactly the type of work we can do. The event was focused on immigration and democracy. It was interfaith. It involved building relationships across different organizations. It allowed us to practice radical hospitality, something we are very good at. A few days after the march, our office got an email, which always makes me nervous. But this person says, "As one of the persons participating in the march, I want to thank you for your support. It mattered that there was a clean, available bathroom and a water fountain, along with a wonderful lunch." She said that the reprieve here allowed her to keep marching all the way downtown. Clean bathrooms might not be the most glamorous part of justice work, but it is important behind-the-scenes efforts. And it's something we can offer. First Parish excels at radical welcome and loving hospitality. We excel at youth-empowered engagement and religious education. We excel at courageous conversations. In the fall of 2021, I started to name my desires for a life partner a little bit more clearly. And instead of waiting for a partner to be the catalyst, I decided to take control where I could. I bought a condo in Arlington by myself, and I intentionally rooted myself in this community as your parish minister. I was making my values fleshy, creating the possibility of having a child by myself if that's what unfolded. And I kept pushing myself, opening myself up to new connections, getting beyond my living room. It wasn't easy to live my values in that way. But I knew I wanted to live in a way that was open to possibility, not isolated. 5 days before I closed on my condo in Arlington, I met Daniel at a friend's birthday party. After worship today, folks from Reckoning and Repair will share other ways that we can practice institutional embodiment, that historical covenantal work that makes repair possible. They will share our commitment to repair and how we can make transformation fleshy, where our deep gladness can meet the world's deep hunger. I hope you'll stay for their presentation and hear from 2 guests from UU Urban Ministry. The enormity of structural racism won't be solved with our efforts, but we can make a needed difference, be one more swing of the axe. The enormity of the world's grief is overwhelming, and every day I struggle not to be daunted by it. And I don't always know what the answers are, but I do know what living my values feels like, what it means to make our commitments real, to find that place of deep gladness and deep hunger. It is not to say that I or we always get it right, but I do know that I won't find it if I don't look, if we don't try. Thank goodness, this is a place that helps me get up off the couch.